News stories shape us. Our beliefs, our choices, our history. Whether from a small-town newspaper, a solo documentarian, or a whole team at a global news organization, these stories are critical to our democracy. And it's up to us to make sure they're told. For more than 50 years, the Reporters Committee for Freedom of the Press has provided journalists, filmmakers, and all members of the press with legal help to ensure their stories, sources, and rights are protected, working together to expose corruption and uncover truth. As the media landscape shifts and the pillars of journalism are under attack, it's more important than ever for our lawyers to take action. Because when journalists are silenced, the public is left in the dark. And it's that darkness that threatens our democracy and our freedoms. That's why we've made it our mission over the past 5 decades to never back down when the First Amendment is at stake, to never stop asking the difficult questions or taking on the difficult cases. We do this to ensure that the next 50 years are shaped by the stories that matter, and that those who bring those stories to light will always remain protected. To provide all reporters and lawyers with the resources they need to carry on the fight, and to protect the public's right to access facts and information. Together, with the support of our donors, the tireless drive of our staff and board members, and the will of every journalist in every medium, we can keep democracy covered.
Hello, everyone. I'm Brad Smith, the president of Microsoft. I'm delighted to join you for what I think is such an important event, and really what is such an important milestone for the Reporters Committee. I'm struck because it was 11 years after the Reporters Committee was founded that there was another milestone in journalism, one I still remember. It was Walter Cronkite's last broadcast. I was a college student. Every evening we would gather around the television, we would watch the news, and he would conclude every broadcast the same way, with the words, "That's the way it is." It's remarkable because it was a time when we all argued about what it meant to think about the issues of the day, what we should do as a society to address them. But we all agreed about what was happening in the country and around the world. It's a reminder of what Alexis de Tocqueville saw when he visited America in 1835. He went from town to town, and he saw in each town the importance of local journalism. And he talked about what it meant to our country, and he said this: to suppose that journalists exist only to protect freedom is to underestimate their importance. They maintain civilization. I think that is true. I think it's true today. And yet, as you all know better than me, we come together, albeit virtually, at a time when journalism has been in distress. Especially local journalism has been in distress. 1,540 counties in this country, over half, are down to only one newspaper, and 200 counties have no newspaper at all. This frames what I think is one of the challenges of our time, not just for journalism, but for democracy. And that's why the work of the Reporters Committee is more important, I believe, than ever before. So as we look forward, what can we do? Well, the truth is we're all going to have to do more, starting with you all who work in this critical profession, but it's also, I think, an opportunity and a responsibility that impacts all of us who care about journalism, including at a company like Microsoft. I think we have to think anew about the economics of journalism. We have to address the fact that one of the most important sources of revenue for journalists, advertising, has frankly been diverted away from the people who are making the news and instead are going to a small number of companies that are distributing news and other content via the internet. As I said when I testified in Congress earlier this year, we need new initiatives that will redirect revenue back to journalists. And we're going to need to innovate. We're going to need to explore new public and private partnerships. It's one of the things that we're doing at Microsoft with a number of journalistic and private foundations in a number of places across the country. And at the same time, we should constantly stay focused on what gave the Reporters Committee its reason for existence in the first place: the protection of journalists and the protection of their sources. That includes these days pro bono work, important pro bono work, to help smaller news organizations get the legal representation they need. And it also requires, frankly, an alliance with the tech sector. Because if we don't stand together, we will find that governments come to tech companies to obtain emails and text messages and other sources without journalists and their enterprises even knowing about it. So in short, we have a lot of work to do. It is a critical time to do it. Thank you for the profession you have chosen to make your own. I look forward to a broad effort to create bright opportunities for young people today and a bright future for journalism in the future. Now over to your host, Kristen Welker.
Hello and welcome to the 2021 Freedom of the Press Awards. My name is Kristen Welker. I'm the co-anchor of Weekend Today and NBC News Chief White House Correspondent. I will be your host tonight as we celebrate the Freedom of the Press Awards and the 50th anniversary of the Reporters Committee for Freedom of the Press. For more than 15 years, I've covered everything from political campaigns to the White House, telling important stories that directly affect our daily lives. And I'm just so thrilled to be here tonight with the Reporters Committee. I understand the importance of this mission, providing free legal support for journalists and defending the right to gather news. In 1970, the Reporters Committee's founders created this organization to counter threats to press freedom and, in turn, our democracy. Over the last 5 decades, this organization has supported the entire journalism community, from local reporters and freelance photographers to investigative journalists and documentary filmmakers, so they can keep you informed and hold public elected officials accountable. Thanks to donors, Reporters Committee lawyers continue to help journalists gather and report the news without charging a penny. They defend reporters from being forced to reveal confidential sources and push back against government agencies when they refuse to turn over public records. Freedom of the press is crucial to keeping the public informed. You can help protect press freedom by visiting rcfp.org/give. We're here tonight celebrating our mission while honoring leaders in journalism and media law whose work embodies our values and highlights the ongoing need for our services. Throughout the evening, we'll hear thought-provoking conversations from our honorees and industry leaders. I'd love to be the first to congratulate tonight's recipients: J. Scott Applewhite, Theodore J. Boutros Jr., Julie K. Brown, Amal Clooney, Jane Mayer. I extend my heartfelt congratulations to the Rising Star Award recipient, Laura Moscoso, who is a data journalist for the Center of Investigative Journalism. And finally, to Sandra Torrey and Tony Mauro, who will be receiving the Fred Graham Distinguished Service Award. Thank you for all of your incredible dedication to the First Amendment and protecting our right to know. Journalism is a cornerstone of democracy. Sometimes journalists need a lawyer to help tell the important stories we need to know. Tonight, we're exploring these intersections, starting with a roundtable discussion about the importance of investigative journalism, led by Jane Mayer and Julie K. Brown.
So, Julie, first of all, I am incredibly honored to be here with you today and to be sharing the same award that you are today, the Freedom of the Press Award. Your work has been trailblazing for years. You've revealed inequities in the criminal justice system for quite some time, but nothing quite blew the lid off of how different the rich and the poor are treated in our legal system, I think, than quite like your reporting on Jeffrey Epstein, both the series you did for the Miami Herald and the recent book that you've done, Perversion of Justice. People have called you dogged and a badass. The Columbia Journalism Review tweeted when Epstein was sentenced the second time that this is what happens when a great reporter refuses to give up. This is well-deserved. Was there much of a behind-the-scenes struggle to get this story, and how much of it involved struggling with the legal system and getting help from the legal system?
Well, this story was about 10, almost 15 years old when I started to look at it. And none of the stories that I read seemed to tell me how and why it happened. So I decided I would just start from scratch, just ask for all the records I could get my hands on. And of course, one of the first things that happens is because the case is so old, they say they can't find the records, and one of the tricks I've learned, I'm sure, Jane, you know how to do this. You ask for it and then you get what you get, and then you wait a little while and then you find something else and you realize they didn't give you everything. So then you put another request in, and you have to be relentless on the public records request, because a lot of times the records that they give you the first time around are not all the records that there were. So I had to really go back and look everything, every case, every police report, just everything that I could get my hands on. And I think the biggest obstacle that I faced with this was that a lot of the documents were redacted and sealed. And it was quite, a rewarding moment when I watched our lawyer, Sandy Boer, argue before the Circuit Court of Appeals to unseal these on behalf of, the First Amendment, on behalf of the public, which deserved to know the circumstances behind this deal. There were very few people that really knew what we were doing until the very end, because I was concerned that these people would go after these women after all these years if they found out that they were finally talking to us and going public.
How important do you think it was in talking to the victims to be able to tell them that they would be legally protected? I personally have found it often very helpful to be able to say, I've got the best lawyers in the world working with me, and they will help protect you. But were you able to say that to the victims that you were trying to get speak to you?
In fact, the one victim, her lawyer told her not to talk to.
Is that right?
She, against his wishes, did decide to talk to us. And just to fast forward until after the series ran, that lawyer then called me back and said he was so grateful that she ignored him. Jane has been one of my heroes in journalism that I have followed and tried to do the same kind of work, based on all the success that she has had with uncovering so many dark corners of, government. Can you talk a little bit about what led you to go down this particular road with finances and money?
So this really is, to me, much more a matter of following the power. I'm sort of very interested in ethics and corruption and power and what people do behind closed doors. And a lot of the time, if you follow the money, you follow where the power is. It's just so important to American politics. So, you kind of can't avoid it, really, if you're going to really cover how power works in this country. And so I just got used to taking a closer look, turning over the rocks, seeing what was under them. I was covering the Tea Party uprising when Obama was president. And what I noticed was that after going to various rallies, that they had the same signs, the same slogans, the same behavior of sort of constituents screaming at their elected representatives about the same issues in the same ways. And I began to wonder, is there some kind of organization behind this? It didn't take very long to realize that there were a few major national organizations, and one of them was called Americans for Prosperity. And if you ask the people on the ground there around me, do you know the Kochs? Are they working with you? They say, oh yeah, we've been working with them for years. So it kind of lifted a lid off for me to see that behind the billionaires' denials, there actually were all of these veins of money in the country, and that a lot of things that looked like spontaneous uprisings were actually getting funded by the same two extraordinarily wealthy brothers. I learned later that the Kochs had hired a private eye to collect Oppo research on me and to try to smear my reputation. The story was up for a prize from a national magazine award, and they were trying to smear me in advance of it because the magazine had nominated me. And they did their best. I mean, they went through my life. Luckily, it was so boring. My life was so ordinary and careful. I return my library books and I pay my parking tickets. And in fact, the Kochs had gone after many people. I was just one of them. And they and much more concerning, really, is that they had tried to intimidate some of the sources that over the years who were critics of theirs, anyone who might dissent. What I worry about are the small publications in this country. I mean, local news is already really under pressure and in many cases disappearing. And it's frightening to think what could happen to the need to hold people in power accountable if these small publications don't have some kind of legal resources to back them up.
Even regional papers, we are even concerned about our legal costs. I mean, there have been times when we have to weigh, are we really going to take this on, because this is going to cost an awful lot of money. And that's basically what's happening even in areas where the records are public. They're raising these fees so that it makes it impossible for newspapers to be able to obtain the records. I really enjoyed this conversation, and I hope you continue all your good work. And thank you again to the Reporters Committee for honoring me. And let's just keep fighting, because this is really important, especially right now when there's so many aspects of our democracy that's being threatened.
I totally agree, Julie. It's been great talking to you. You and I have been grouped together in one story as badasses together, and it's just the ultimate compliment. And I'm so glad to share that moniker with you. And I want to just thank the Reporters Committee again for the tremendous work they do. It's a group that grew organically out of a need. Reporters themselves started it. And I just, can't say enough good things about it. It's doing a wonderful mission in the world, and we need it more than ever.
I'm CNN's Wolf Blitzer. I've spent my whole career covering breaking news, overseas wars, presidential elections, natural disasters, court cases, you name it, I've covered it. As journalists, our instinct is to go where news is happening, to find the best sources, to capture the most striking images, and to deliver that news immediately as it develops. We move fast because the news moves fast, and thankfully, so does the Reporters Committee. This past year, as journalists risked their safety to bring you breaking news about the pandemic, elections, racial justice, protests, Reporters Committee attorneys responded, and they responded quickly, confidently, with the force of law behind them. When the coronavirus put our world on pause, Reporters Committee attorneys kept going, immediately publishing guides and fielding hotline calls to help journalists navigate pandemic restrictions and to fight for access to data and documents about COVID outbreaks. Records that help you make informed decisions about how to keep your loved ones safe. When journalists were punched and pepper sprayed while covering nationwide protests, RCFP lawyers quickly denounced the assaults and rallied dozens of news organizations and other allies to join them in urging police and government officials to stop interfering with your right to know, all in an effort to make sure journalists could document history so that you could witness it. Reporters Committee attorneys don't just move fast, they do so with effectiveness and perseverance. When filing legal briefs in court or sending letters to government officials, they bring the weight of the industry with them so that we can do collectively what no single newsroom can do on its own. Today's news moves faster than ever before, story after story. Journalists will be there to cover it. But when we need powerful legal support on deadline, the Reporters Committee is ready to respond. Let's keep it that way.
I'd love to give a virtual round of applause for this year's Freedom of the Press Award winners, all of them such extraordinary journalists. And I'm delighted to be here with RCFP's Executive Director, Bruce Brown.
Hello, Margaret. It is so great to be here with you tonight. We could not do what we do without you. And of course, we cannot do what we do without all of our supporters who are here with us this evening as well.
So what I'd love to do, Bruce, is to spend the next few minutes talking about the Reporters Committee, which formally marked its 50th year in 2020 last year, but for reasons we all understand, we're finally celebrating that milestone together here tonight. So if you would take us back 50 years, Bruce, how did it all begin?
There were a group of leading print and broadcast reporters who felt, as they saw a wave of subpoenas coming at their organizations for confidential source information, that the industry needed an organization like the Reporters Committee, they knew that not every reporter would have an in-house lawyer to have the back of the newsroom. And so they rallied around this idea, and they were a truly inspirational generation of leaders for us.
At the same time, all these reporters and these editorial leaders understood that confidential sources were going to clam up if they worried about being prosecuted for sharing government secrets. And we know when journalist sources go dark, so does the public's access to vital information. And that theme is still so resonant today. I'd love you to talk a little bit about what unfolded over this last summer.
It was a very busy summer for us. There were disclosures about subpoena practice coming out of the Trump administration. It had been secret. When we learned about it, the Reporters Committee jumped into gear. There were 3 news organizations that received this compulsory process: the New York Times, the Washington Post, and CNN. And we worked with them and our other partners. And we, for many years, have been coordinating discussions with the Justice Department around its media subpoena practices. And we went with all these partners to DOJ, and we explained why the policy needed to be strengthened yet again, that protecting the flow of information to the public, protecting journalists' confidential sources, protecting the public's right to find out about what is happening in its government. These were all interests that require a strong policy from DOJ around journalist source protection and news gathering protection. And the DOJ heard us, and the Attorney General issued a new policy in July that is the most protective policy that the Justice Department has had in this area in the 50 years that RCFP has been in existence. And I think that the episode shows the way that RCFP can bring together the news organizations, work with them collaboratively, and provide them with a way to strengthen press freedom by working with agencies like the Justice Department, providing that collective voice of the industry around the issues that are most important to us.
I mean, that was just a huge and impressive win for press freedom and transformational, really. And I also think it's important to underscore some of the day-to-day work of the Reporters Committee.
There's so much that our RCFP is doing now. Through direct litigation, are representing journalists in matters all around the country. We have a hotline that journalists and media lawyers know they can use day or night to find a Reporters Committee attorney who can help. We are responding rapidly to emergencies in newsrooms around the country when a lawyer is needed to file something on a very quick turnaround.
We are so pleased that we now have Susan Zirinsky on our board. Susan is the legendary producer and former president of CBS News, now president of See It Now Studios. She gave us the best tagline.
When democracy needs a lawyer.
Right. I love that. When democracy needs a lawyer, who are you going to call? RCFP. Thank you for that great line, Susan. Thank you, Bruce. And thank you, everyone, for being with us tonight and for your enduring support.
It can't be said enough. Media lawyers play a crucial role in helping journalists and reporters inform the public. And thanks to donations, the Reporters Committee can offer that legal aid for free. To learn more, please visit rcfp.org/give or follow the instructions on screen. Well, this evening is just getting started. Later, we'll talk about the power of an image in photojournalism, how to hold the police accountable, accessing court documents, and more. But up next, we're hearing from experienced and renowned journalists whose careers fall at the intersection of law and journalism. This next conversation is led by steering committee members Pierre Thomas, the senior justice correspondent at ABC News, as well as Fred Graham, Distinguished Service Award recipients Tony Mauro, contributor at ALM Media Properties LLC, and Sandra Torre, retired member of USA Today's editorial board.
It's with great joy today that I get a chance to talk to two of our Fred Graham Distinguished Service Award honorees, Sandra Torre and Tony Mauro. There's a lot of public service in people like yourselves who made this their life's work, a sense of wanting to provide the American public with information so they can make the choices that they need to make. Do you share that belief?
Absolutely. It really is a public service. The public doesn't always feel that way. We're not a most popular profession. We are conveying to the public what they need to know.
I think that many people don't know what we do and how important it is to the public, but our reward for doing it is being part of and in on some of the major historical events of our lifetime. And knowing that we know that we're doing something good.
When did you first hear about the Reporters Committee, and what made you decide to become a part?
I was working for the Washington Post at the time. Our publisher, Don Graham, decided to take a bunch of us who covered legal beats to a benefit dinner for the Reporters Committee sometime in the mid 1990s. And I went, I saw the people they were honoring, listened to the speeches by people about what the Reporters Committee does. And from that moment on, I said, I want to be part of this.
When I first came to Washington in 1979 to cover the Supreme Court for Gannett and USA Today, the major news organizations had representation in the committee. And so my boss said, you know about Supreme Court, you know about First Amendment issues, why don't you do it? And I was great because I thought I had known about the Reporters Committee. I knew how important it was helping journalists with with issues that government officials were closing the doors on them. It was a stormy era for journalists. And when I saw how much the Reporters Committee was doing and doing for free, I thought this is great. Nobody who has come to the Reporters Committee for help has ever had to pay a penny for that help.
That's just extraordinary. Talk about what you see the mission as being now, and has it changed at all from the day you walked through those doors to become a part of the committee?
Well, I think the mission is largely the same, to help journalists do their work when government and other folks don't want us to do our work the way we need to. In 2012, when Bruce Brown became the executive director, we decided to do some litigation to put real teeth into what we do and to make a difference with cases that would be very important for all journalists.
Actually, part of realizing the importance of the Reporters Committee mission is that I've had my own brushes with issues over confidentiality and press freedom. In fact, I was once almost arrested. But I often think about people at smaller papers or freelancers, and for them, what we provide allows them to feel that same confidence and be able to stand up for these important missions that we have, not to reveal sources and to tell real stories.
You don't dedicate this much time to something that has required a lot of time and energy without having not just a commitment to it, but a love and a passion for it. Why have you done this so long, been engaged, and continue to be engaged?
This is so important to the public, to have open government, no secrecy, have reporters be able to report stories that many people don't want us to tell about corruption and so forth. It's a particularly important time now with so many newspapers closing, merging. We're losing many of the small papers and medium-sized papers across the country. And I think government officials, the ones who want to keep secrets, feel that they can get away with it more now because there are fewer local papers and there's less money for papers to go after them in court. So our mission becomes even more urgent today.
I could talk to you guys for hours. It's just been that much of a joy to honor you in this way, to have this conversation. The Reporters Committee is in your debt. We will always be in your debt.
At the Reporters Committee, it's our job to ensure that journalists are prepared to tackle the next big story. Because when we prepare them, we empower them. Through free, in-depth resources and trainings, our attorneys help journalists understand their legal rights so they can hold government accountable and keep you in the know. Over the past year, we've helped journalists navigate public health laws so they can easily track coronavirus outbreaks. We've helped journalists exercise their rights under public records laws so they can obtain footage from police body cameras and tell their communities the full story when officers use excessive force. And we've helped journalists understand state election laws, making it easier for them to access ballots and records during one of the most consequential elections in recent memory. The Reporters Committee offers these legal guides, tip sheets, and trainings to news organizations large and small, to journalists in coastal cities and mountain towns, all for free. Our legal resources and trainings provide journalists with peace of mind. They enable journalists to gather and report the news without fear of facing a lawsuit or an arrest. But our pro bono resources and trainings don't just serve journalists. They also serve the communities that rely on their reporting. When our attorneys publish a legal guide explaining press freedom on tribal lands, it helps journalists in Oklahoma, Alaska, and other states improve their coverage of Indigenous nations. When we host a training breaking down the ins and outs of the Freedom of Information Act, it helps journalists access more public records, promoting transparency on key issues like the environment, voting rights, and capital punishment. When our attorneys inform journalists of their legal rights and how to protect them, what we're really protecting is your right to know.
The Reporters Committee is dedicated to empowering journalists through in-depth resources and training. That's because we believe journalists and reporters are the voice of our nation. We encourage you to use your voice on social media. Share your support, tagging us at RCFP on Twitter and at Reporters Committee on Instagram and Facebook. Now let's keep tonight's conversation going with our next segment about handling threats to press freedom, where we'll hear from Amal Clooney, co-founder and president at the Clooney Foundation for Justice, Theodore J. Boutros Jr., media law attorney and partner at Gibson, Dunn and Crutcher LLP, and moderated by Stephen J. Adler, former Reuters editor-in-chief and Reporters Committee chairman.
Amal Clooney and Ted Boutros, welcome. And congratulations on winning the 2021 Press Freedom Award. I've got to say, it couldn't be more well-deserved. You two are amazing when it comes to work for press freedom, and it's really great to have a chance to chat today. Naturally, threats to press freedom are on our minds today, and I'd like to start by asking you, Ted, about a potential concern here in America. As you know, of course, two Supreme Court justices, Clarence Thomas and Neil Gorsuch, have recently questioned the continued application of New York Times versus Sullivan. And I think that kind of shocked the press freedom community. Do you see a serious threat to the constitutional principle that a public figure has to prove actual malice or reckless disregard of the truth to prevail in a libel suit?
It was shocking when those two justices issued those opinions, because New York Times versus Sullivan really is the bedrock of First Amendment jurisprudence in the United States. And to have a Supreme Court justice even breathe the words that it should be reconsidered is scary. I don't think there's a real risk in the near term that the Supreme Court would do that, but it really is dangerous. And I think there is a plan afoot in certain quarters to try in the long term to get Times versus Sullivan overturned. And that would just be terrible.
And just how much has changed in news technology. Is New York Times versus Sullivan still relevant? Is it time to reconsider it in some way?
We saw an outbreak of libel suits brought by public figures, by President Trump's campaign, President Trump threatening libel suits, Congressman Nunes using a spate of libel suits to attack the media and to try to chill the press. So I think we need Times versus Sullivan now more than ever.
Great, thank you. Amal, it's really great to have you here. Thanks for joining.
Thank you so much.
I wanted to talk about the Maria Ressa case. Maria, of course, is the founder and CEO of the highly independent Philippine news site Rappler. And since, I guess, back in 2018, the Duterte government has brought multiple charges against her for things like cyber libel, tax evasion, securities fraud, and you're representing her. So tell us what this case is about and why should people care about it?
You know, it's actually not so far removed from what we've just been talking about. The Filipino system actually tries to apply New York Times versus Sullivan. So, you know, I think we should always be aware when talking about what's happening in the US that the world is watching and many systems are inspired by US law in this area and others, of course, as well. So the ripple effect will be felt far and wide if there's any substantial lowering of the protections in the United States. But as you say, Maria Ressa, so she is, you know, she's 5'2", and I've said before she stands taller than so many of us in her noble pursuit of the truth. And she has faced devastating consequences, basically just for being a good journalist as a result of essentially exposing abuses by the government in the Philippines. She became, you know, the primary target of that government. And, you know, her case is actually emblematic. It illustrates a whole host of threats that are being faced by journalists all over the world. So it starts with an online campaign against her of sort of hate messages and to try and discredit her. It leads to civil suits which try to bankrupt her news organization, and then ultimately the threat of criminal penalties. I mean, all of the work that she does is about trying to improve the landscape for not only herself, but all journalists in her country and in Asia to be able to report freely.
Talking about online harassment, because that's something that's affecting journalists everywhere in the world and also in the US, of course. Since we're talking about legal protections, does anything in the law, starting with the US, currently provide any recourse to victims of these online attacks?
There are laws, there are cyber stalking laws in some states. There's a federal law that can be applied in this context, but they're not really used as much as they should be. They're not prosecuted. And so what I think we need is a more concentrated law enforcement effort to go after people who do this.
Female journalists in particular are often targeted with these kinds of campaigns. People like Maria are incredibly courageous, but we can't expect people to withstand this kind of abuse just in order to go to work every day. It just can't work.
Of course, a conversation like this has to come around to Donald Trump at some point. The press was persistently attacked during his presidency. He's not president now. So do each of you think he did long-term damage to press freedom, or was it just during his administration? And also, was that damage, if it occurred just in the US, or does it have kind of tendrils outside the US? Molly, you want to start with that?
Let's look at the figures. We're dealing with, you know, the highest rates of journalists being killed around the world, being imprisoned around the world. We know 9 out of 10 journalist murders are unpunished. And I think, you know, Donald Trump, his rhetoric in relation to the media at home definitely emboldened autocrats abroad. We heard leaders in places like Cambodia invoke Trump's language when clamping down on their own press. I think we're also entering into a new era of shamelessness, if we can call it that, you know, seeing the Belarus leaders feel that, you know, they can divert a commercial airline in midair and ground it in order to arrest a journalist and put them in prison. And ultimately, the message from Western democracies going back to this behavior is that not very much is going to happen as a result. So I do worry about the legacy of President Trump.
Donald Trump really has damaged freedom of the press around the world. He's labeling the press the enemy of the people, really conducting a disinformation campaign, a campaign of falsity from the White House for 4 years and more. Incalculable damage, taking action against the press, politicizing Voice of America and making it look like a true arm of the state. We had to sue and work with the Reporters Committee on that case and won. And so it really is a way to, it's had a delegitimizing effect on journalism. It's caused the public to not trust journalists and journalism. And that really hurts democracy, as Amal was saying. So I think it's a real problem. It's a lasting problem, and we've got to fight back.
I want to ask both of you, because we've talked about so many difficulties and so many threats. Is there anything that gives you hope about the future of the free press, both in the US and abroad?
I think the fact that we've seen such incredible journalism, and again, we've been talking about the last 4 or 5 years in particular, it's been amazing. Financial journalism, journalism about the government, journalism about what's happening in the world, in Afghanistan, notwithstanding all these obstacles, notwithstanding the war on the press from the President of the United States, notwithstanding what's happening in these other countries and things that Amal has been battling. So that gives me a lot of hope.
Well, my name means hope, so I have to be hopeful no matter what the data says and the experience shows. No, look, I'm hopeful. I think this administration is taking a very different approach to these issues than the previous one. And I think America can change the world. And if there's a concerted effort to also work with allies like the EU and other democracies, I think we can see a reversal of some of the, the trends and abuses that we've been talking about and are still worried about. As lawyers, we owe it to them to do what we can, and politicians, of course, have to do the same. And so I hope we'll see those who are making lofty speeches about democracy and human rights and freedom of the press. It's really time that we see that turn into concerted action, because these journalists really deserve better.
Well, listen, let me thank both of you, both on behalf of Reporters Committee, and I know journalists everywhere. We're all so grateful for all you do for your clients, for journalism, for press freedom, and we're really honored to be able to honor you, because you're just two of the great advocates for press freedom in the world. So thank you for joining us, and thank you for all you do.
Once again, thank you to the community of lawyers who continue to defend our First Amendment rights. It's never been more clear how valuable you are in making it possible for journalists like myself to do our jobs. To learn more and to join the mission, please visit rcfp.org/give or follow the instructions on screen. We still have plenty of thought-provoking conversations left for this evening, and our next segment focuses on police accountability and the important role that journalists and lawyers play in helping their communities monitor taxpayer-funded law enforcement. This conversation is led by Rachel Johnson, local legal initiative attorney based in Colorado at the Reporters Committee for Freedom of the Press, Mark Pereskia, journalist in residence at the University of Memphis, and Dwayne Smoot, journalist and lawyer at Muskogee, Phoenix.
This is certainly a topic that's very exciting to talk about, and there's a lot of interest in it, I think, right now. I was wondering if you all could just talk a little bit about the barriers journalists face in covering law enforcement.
15 years ago, when I first started here at the Muskogee, Phoenix, I used to be able to walk into the police department. I'd walk back and pick up the records, rifle through them, pick out what was important, walk back to the detective's room and visit with them and talk to them about the cases I was interested in. And over time that has, changed, where, no longer have that access.
Dwayne, I think that's a common experience. It certainly is my experience here in Memphis. These days in Memphis, every request that you want, whether it's the police or whatever division, has funneled through the city attorney's office through a public records portal. And there's this huge queue that they have you backed up behind. And when it comes to the police, there are a lot of records that we don't even have access to anymore. Like, for example, incident reports that pertain to homicides or sexual assault. The police, they've had a number of scandals here because of, officer corruption, and they had a huge rape kit backlog where they weren't properly investigating sexual assault or processing these kits. It's become very difficult for a number of reasons, some that, that weren't necessarily designed by the government, but others that were, to control this information.
How has, this lack of access, do you think, impacted the public's understanding of how law enforcement operates?
Well, I think it leads to a lot of mistrust between the police department and the residents.
Body camera programs were developed all over the country with millions of dollars of taxpayer money invested into them, with the explicit purpose of building community trust, transparency, and showing what the police are doing when they are using excessive force and when they're the victims of perhaps false claims. But the problem here in Memphis and all over the country is that these programs aren't transparent. They're not. They are the most opaque programs. You cannot get access to them. Citizens and reporters can't get access to them because the costs for obtaining footage are so steep. We've been charged as much for police video, $3,100.
And then oftentimes you have to, potentially file a lawsuit to get access if you can't get access, by any other means.
After George Floyd was murdered up in Minneapolis by the police, he down in Memphis, as reporters did all over the country, started digging into excessive force issues. And I spent a lot of time, trying to get access to the Memphis Police Department's internal investigations of excessive force, which led to a lawsuit that we did file here. The Reporters Committee for Freedom of the Press filed it on my behalf as an individual journalist. When I was trying to get access to this video footage of a police officer down here who had been nicknamed by his colleagues Taser Face because he had used his taser so literally over time in different incidents. And I wanted the video of that. We couldn't have done it without the Reporters Committee, their local initiative. They have one here in Tennessee. They represented me pro bono, so it didn't cost me anything. And it was, I felt, a slam dunk victory for freedom of the press.
There's got to be accountability and there's got to be transparency in policing and at all levels of government, but particularly with policing, because it's like I say, it's an issue of trust.
What do you have then if you don't have basic information? You've got a police state where you have no right to know anything. I mean, that's just absurd to me. I mean, to me, it's kind of worth it is worth the risk to take them on this, that you can't have secret police in conducting major investigations in secrecy. There has to be some form of public accountability.
Really, thanks for sharing your experiences. And it's been great to hear about your work and how you've been able to create access in Memphis and in Oklahoma.
As journalists, we recognize the importance of accessing public records for accountability, accuracy, transparency, and integrity. It's not always an easy feat, but it's our duty to serve the public. And sometimes we need support from media lawyers who help us access such crucial documents. Now, you can show your support on social media. Tag us at RCFP on Twitter and at Reporters Committee on Instagram and Facebook. Our next conversation revolves around the power of an image. Over the past 18 months, images have especially connected us to stories about COVID-19 and protests. They've helped us better understand the news. These two veteran journalists have been on the front lines of some of this country's biggest stories. Join us as we talk about documenting history through the lens of photojournalism with J. Scott Applewhite, senior photojournalist at the Associated Press, and Leonel Mendez, photojournalist at CNN.
Hi, especially to Leonel. It's a great honor to meet you and talk to you about your experiences over the last year. What a chaotic year it's been.
Nice to meet you, Scott. I was looking at your photos online and wow, what a career you've had.
At the very core of it, our job is to show people what they cannot see for themselves and to help them see their world, whether it's armed conflict or social upheaval. It's about helping us to understand our world and convey that to others.
We bring those images in video and still photography home to people, to take them there, to make them feel what is actually happening.
You know, we have to get in close. We have to go where other people don't want to go, and to see what other people maybe don't want to see. That means you have to get to where the action is. We have to be closer than any other journalist.
You've had some incredible access to the White House that a lot of people don't get. A lot of people want to see what's going on inside the White House.
I feel like we have a responsibility and a duty to try to, pull the curtain back a little bit to find the reality of the moment. You'll find a nugget of reality inside the stage situation.
Being at George Floyd Square during the reading of the verdict, people crying and cheering, and to see the emotion and just being there with them, it was very powerful.
It goes to the very core of what we are as photojournalists. We have this amazing gift that we've been given to witness the world as it is in our time. And, what could be more important than that?
Just to watch that story evolve, and all of it, from the protest to the funeral to the trial to the verdict.
This story was so big, it took a team of photographers over different cities throughout the country because the story was nationwide, worldwide.
Yeah, that image with the upside down flag and the fire burning, it had so much meaning to it. I was there that morning. I remember the guy walking around with the flag, and that one capture, that one moment in time says a lot.
And I think that was part of the power of Julio's incredible image. I remember it the night it came over the wire. It was symbolic. It was accurate. It was truthful. The symbolism was incredible. You went through quite an ordeal there with your crew being arrested. And I'd like to hear a little bit more about that. I think the camera makes you a real target these days.
It was unexpected to get that, to be treated like that by the police department. I understand the anger in people sometimes, and but that morning with the police department, Minneapolis, I think it was coming from both sides. Got shot in the leg with like a 40-millimeter round by the police. Those kind of pellets. Luckily, it hit my phone in my pocket. It completely shattered the phone.
Wow.
On that same day, I got attacked by a protester with a crowbar, which I blocked with the camera and the monopod. You understand what that's like. You're focusing on one person and one image, and you don't see what's coming from behind you.
We have to be close to where the action is. Not only that, there's always others trying to stop us from showing what we see, because they know the power of the pictures. There's a hostility to the facts sometimes. It's not about us as journalists. It's about the right of citizens to know. We work for organizations like the AP, CNN, that, who come to your aid. We know you and I have the freedom to operate knowing that someone's always got our back. It's the vital role of the Reporters Committee for Freedom of the Press to be there for any journalist, freelancers, everybody. Their work is so important.
You were at the insurrection at the Capitol?
Right.
What did you feel there?
We knew it was going to be contentious, and we also knew that there were going to be these protests in town. What we didn't know was how serious it might be at the Capitol. I was inside the chamber, and when it was announced to the Congress, the rotunda, the Capitol had been breached, tear gas had been deployed, they began an evacuation process. It was calm, but it was deliberate. And I was up in the balcony and looking down at the chamber, and I was able to linger a little bit longer. It had an eerie quiet, but boy, you could always just hear the growl of the mob behind the doors. And I knew that if they were able to break through that door, it would be consequential. I mean, they had already stopped the Electoral College. They did what they came to do. I knew I had to hold fast there, and that's what we did.
And then we saw the smashing of the AP Cruz camera.
Wow. Yeah, that was shot by one of our freelancers, Jose Luis Magana, and who did an incredible job that day. I can't imagine that the people who destroyed all the equipment would have gone any easier on the people, on the cameramen. When we were talking about being a target, I'd say that's about as good an example as any. Hopefully what we do, the images we make, the archived footage that you shoot, maybe it'll help understand and explain things as we go along, because we never seem to understand things in the moment. We feel it, we're hurt by it. There were over 400 physical attacks against journalists just recorded in the last year, probably more. And so much of that occurred as the journalists were covering the nationwide protest. And essentially, not that we have any more rights than anybody, any other citizen, but the right to cover the news, the right to inform the public was suppressed. Whenever you're in jail or you got your handcuffs on, you can't be doing your job as a journalist. So this year, at least, the need for more support and protection for journalists has been absolutely clear. At least the Reporters Committee is absolutely committed to providing that protection, providing that support, and paving the way for us to do our jobs.
It's been great talking to you, Scott. A lot of times we don't talk about our experiences, and to open up about things that we cover and see with another fellow photographer. It's good to talk about that. We have similar experiences.
Thanks to the AP, I've been able to travel the world and witness history firsthand. What an opportunity. It's been an honor, and I appreciate the recognition tonight, but this is really about the work of the Reporters Committee and the incredible, vital work that they do, and how great it's been to have this conversation with you, Lionel. And I hope I see you again soon.
As we begin to close out our evening, I'd like to thank all of the honorees, recipients, and speakers once more for their time and dedication to journalism. And thank you to the community of lawyers who protect journalists and our work. To those watching, you can learn more by visiting rcfp.org/give or by following the instructions on screen. We've talked a lot tonight about the value of legal support, and our final conversation of the evening shines a spotlight on it. In this segment, we'll hear about the experience of accessing court records, covering the judicial system, and why having an attorney on your side matters from the perspective of 3 investigative journalists: Kimbrielle Kelly from the Los Angeles Times, Ed Silverman from Stat News and the Boston Globe, and Kay Stevens from Altoona Mirror.
Today, we're going to talk about court records and access to them. It's not the easiest thing to pull information out, but as an investigative reporter, the main goal is to shine light on things that are hidden. And with court records, we do just that. A lot of my work has been around police accountability. And I've written stories about police officers who have been charged with things like sexual assault. In many of those cases, we relied on court records to show the background and the history of many of these officers. Sometimes they had been fired from other departments for things that were quite questionable. As the media landscape changes, it's quite expensive to pursue litigation, and many reporters just don't have that at their disposal. And you've done a lot of work, particularly around Purdue Pharma and court records. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Well, I've been covering the pharmaceutical industry for 26 years now. All too often, there were agreements reached to keep certain information redacted or sealed. And the issue and concern came up in a big way with Purdue Pharma. And we fought aggressively in a state court to obtain records that we knew existed, specifically concerning a lengthy deposition of one of the senior Sackler family members. We were actively involved in pursuit of information that in one court or another was not readily available or easily obtained. The Reporters Committee helped that goal considerably because of the resources and because of the smarts. One involved documents that indicated how the Sackler family members maintained that they had not foreseen the extent of the litigation. And therefore, as a result, even though they had been transferring billions of dollars over time out of the company to whichever financial accounts, they insisted that this was not what's known as a fraudulent conveyance, an illegal, improper act to shift and hide money. And this is very important when you step back and try to understand the extent to which the Sackler family members were hovering over the control of the company, how they benefited, how they profited, and how the decisions that were made affected the company and its finances. This was a really important effort that helped with our reporting and our interpretation for our readers.
I am thoroughly a local news reporter out here in the middle of central Pennsylvania, and a lot of the kind of cases that you deal with start at my level. So that's why I saw this red flag a few months ago. I noticed a local judge's reference to sealing the records in a civil court case, and they relate to a criminal court case that I've been following. So I'm thinking there's no reason for these records to be sealed, especially because I've got the criminal court case going on in a neighboring courtroom. But then he comes up with a modified gag order and what they can talk about regarding these cases. I turned to the Reporters Committee, and that put me in touch with Attorney Paula Burke. And she has been very good at giving me the legal reasons as to why I have the right position that these cases should be unsealed and that we should have access to all those court records.
That's the goal of investigative reporting, is to shine a light on things that are hidden. That support comes from places like the Reporters Committee, who helps, as you've heard this evening, organizations large and small. It's great to have that support in these two cases, but I look forward to a future where reporters can continue to rely on the organization for that kind of support.
Hello, my name is Bruce Brown, and I'm Executive Director of the Reporters Committee for Freedom of the Press. And I'm so happy to be here with you tonight as we recognize this year's honorees and celebrate 50 years of supporting journalists through pro bono legal representation. And it's so important that I take a moment to express my gratitude for the people who make our vital work possible. Our donors' dedication to journalism and the First Amendment is what permits us to provide journalists with the legal assistance needed to ensure they can rightfully do their jobs. I'd first like to thank our presenting sponsor, Microsoft, as well as our anniversary champions, Apple, Jane Boone, and Norman Pearlstein, and the Chan Soon-Chong Family Foundation. I'd also like to show my appreciation for our legacy champions, Amanda Bennett and Don Graham, Chevron, the Murray Fromson family, Gibson Dunn and Crutcher, and Hearst. And of course, all of you who've joined us this evening with your own support, thank you. Journalism is a cornerstone of our democracy, and it's thanks to our donors that we've been able to spend the last 5 decades working to protect that. Thank you. And now I'd like to introduce our Rising Star Award winner, data journalist, Lara Moscoso.
We were committed to digging up the data of deaths associated with Hurricane Maria for 2 main reasons. We were hearing from hospitals and first responders and NGOs that something was happening and that too many people were dying but weren't being counted. And another thing is that it is very different when you as a reporter are also going through the disaster that you are covering. So it had an impact on us. So we were part of our community that was struggling with knowing what was happening with our family members. Visual publications have a deeper impact, right, on people's mind. When you see a map that is geocoding the events that are happening and where people are dying and where the government is not going, right? And you can relate to the lack of access to medical services, the lack of communication with the local agencies, then people see themselves in the story. They can validate what you're writing, and they can also become a source, right? Because they see this information in a map and they say, wait, I'm from there. And if that happened there, maybe other things happen. So I'm going to dig up on my own and I'll get back to you. So after publishing our first stories, we wanted to sue the government over a specific public record, which is the database that contains all the deaths that happened in Puerto Rico. We could prove our point that people were dying not because of immediate causes of the hurricane, but because of long-term events like the lack of electricity, pollution of water, etc. On June 2018, the government lost the case and the judge ordered them to give us the death registry database. I think that the first impact that this investigation had from the public, for me, I see it as a sense of validation of their own experiences. Some of our readers didn't understand in the beginning why we were suing the government for this death registry, because it sounds so abstract and so concrete at the same time. After we published our investigation on September 2018, on the anniversary of Maria, the first anniversary of Maria, I think that people got it. Like, yeah, okay, this is important work, because it's an independent study done by journalists that are telling our stories in the way that we felt it should be told.
It's hard to overstate the power of local investigative journalism. It can expose government corruption, it can shine a light on police misconduct, and as we've seen repeatedly over the past year, it can help communities navigate a public health crisis. But local investigative journalists often need an attorney to defend their rights to gather and report the news, gain access to public records and court proceedings, and hold state and local government officials accountable.
Now, the problem in a small newsroom like mine is that we can't afford legal help. And that means we often have to walk away from stories and investigative projects that are important to our community because we can't get the information we need. Recently, in our county, public officials withheld documents about a multi-million-dollar project using public taxpayer money. We had two choices. We could walk away, or we could call the Reporters Committee. With the help of their lawyers, we got those records that triggered a significant investigative series. The other value of that legal help was it sent a message not only to the local public officials, but officials throughout Oregon, that the press now had a new resource to stand up against government secrecy and to defend the public's right to know. Importantly, for the Malheur Enterprise, this did not cost us a dime.
That's exactly why we launched our local legal initiative, to provide dedicated legal services to journalists in Colorado, Oklahoma, Oregon, Pennsylvania, and Tennessee. With on-the-ground support from our attorneys, local news outlets in these 5 states can fight back when government officials refuse to hand over public records. In our next 50 years, we look forward to helping more local journalists wage those battles in communities across the country, because when we do, the public wins.
Thank you, everyone, for watching tonight. It has been a true honor to be with you. And to all of our speakers, I'd love to give another big congratulations to each recipient and honoree. To close off tonight's event, here's a message from Judy Woodruff, anchor and managing editor at PBS NewsHour, and Alberto Ibargüen, president and CEO of the John S. and James L. Knight Foundation.
I'm Judy Woodruff. I'm the anchor and managing editor of the PBS NewsHour, and I am so glad to be here to help celebrate this extraordinary organization, the Reporters Committee for Freedom of the Press.
And I'm Alberto Ibargüen. I'm president of the John S. and James L. Knight Foundation, which supports informed and engaged communities in the United States. You know, Judy, when we were talking a little earlier about the Reporters Committee and what they do to support free press and free expression. I like to think that I come by my support of the Reporters Committee in a very natural way. I used to work back in the 80s and early 90s at the Hartford Courant. The Hartford Courant was one of the oldest newspapers in the country, and we proudly touted the fact that we were sued and won. We were sued by Thomas Jefferson, of all people, who famously wrote, if he had to choose between government and the press, he would choose the press, as long as that led to an informed society, an informed community that would make good Republican choices. He didn't like what was published in the Hartford Courant. He sued, and I wondered later, where was the Reporters Committee when Thomas Jefferson was suing my newspaper? In any case, the Hartford Courant won, and I always like being on that side.
Well, I think that personal connection that you have with the Reporters Committee is what so many reporters today feel. We have a constitution that sets aside freedom of the press. It's one of the foundations of our democracy. But we also know that we live in the real world, and a lot of people don't want those important stories told, even in our democracy. And the only way that democracy is going to keep flourishing is with a strong and robust and unhindered press that is allowed to do the kind of work that it has to do. And the Reporters Committee is absolutely essential. There's so many stories that have to be told.
We have to have organizations like Reporters Committee that can be flexible and can support the news people that are bringing information to us, can support them in changing along with the very vital and energetic society that we're part of.
Can't say it any better than that.
Well, I'm proud to be here with you, encouraging everybody to do the right thing.
And I am too. It's just, it's a real honor to be here tonight with all of you and to be with Alberto. And we're all pushing for the Reporters Committee to thrive, be even stronger, be even more relevant a year from now, which we know it will be, than it is today. Congratulations, Reporters Committee.
Thanks to all of you who have donated. It is really critically important. Keep donating until it feels good. And thanks to all of the sponsors, particularly to Microsoft, our presenting sponsor, and our partner at Knight in the Reporters Committee legal network.
And thank you again to all of our remarkable honorees. You heard them tonight. They are an extraordinary group. And thank all of you for watching, for following this, and for everything you do for the Reporters Committee. On behalf of Alberto, on behalf of all of us with the Reporters Committee, thank you and good night.